In this video, I'm going to show you how I made this rolling pin out of this block of wood. Stay tuned.
A rolling pin is a pretty fun project to do. Everybody can use one. Anyone that enjoys baking or chasing your spouse around the house when you're angry. Gosh, we really got to get a new joke writer around here. Well, anyhow, what I'm doing right here at the beginning is marking out the positions for the spur centers on the lathe. So I like to have a little indentation on there so I can always line it up if anything ever goes wrong. The first part, as always, is taking the blank and then roughing it out. Pretty simple process to go through. You'll see that I'm going to be using primarily 3 different tools on this project. The first tool I'm going to be using is my roughing gouge. It's a 3/4 inch roughing gouge. Makes pretty quick work going back and forth, clearing out all of the big heavy chunks. Then I actually come in with a 3/8 fingernail bowl gouge for a little bit finer cut and refining of the shape. And then I usually like to clean things up with the skew and then finish it all out with sandpaper. So that's pretty much the process that you're going to see me doing throughout this video, and I'll try to indicate the different times when I'm changing tools exactly what I'm doing with that. I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I acquired the wood for this project. I have a couple other videos on YouTube. One of them is quite popular, called Don't Tell My Wife How I Did This. And to be honest, she would not have liked to have seen what I did in that video. Sometimes I do fairly dangerous work where I'm up in the sawmill and I have to do kind of peculiar things to get the job done. Well, this was a log from that property that everyone said that this log could not be milled. And through the process of making flooring for my customer, there was a few leftover pieces, and so I took advantage of those leftover pieces, cut them into blanks. So these pieces you're seeing here aren't one solid piece. They're actually 3 and sometimes even 4 pieces that I glued together to make the blank that I needed for the rolling pins. When I saw the wood left over, that's usually the first thing that comes to my mind because, like I said before, everyone loves to have a nice rolling pin. The rolling pins that I make, although it is my own design and I think it's somewhat unique, is really nothing new to the world of rolling pins. And there's no real reason to try to reinvent the wheel in such a case. Basically, my design incorporates a 1/4 inch aluminum rod. Obviously, for baking, it could end up getting wet or moisture in there, and I would not want steel to be in the rolling pin rusting. Then I also use nylon bushings that accommodate the 1/4 inch aluminum rod with very little slop, but yet still allows the pin to roll quite freely. Right here you're going to see that I'm taking my skew, it's actually an oval skew, to do some of the final work on this rolling pin. It helps straighten it out, but it also gives it a pretty nice clean finish and makes minimal work of the sanding process, which any turner really appreciates. For the initial sanding, I just use some sandpaper with a flat block. It helps it to get it perfectly straight and smooth all the way across. From then on, you can pretty much do just hand sanding, working your way up through the grits to as high as you want to go. In my case, I go all the way up to 240 with Abernet, and anything after that kind of gets silly for a rolling pin, so I'll just leave it at that. While I was making this video, I think I got a little bit excited and just started going to town on the sanding process. Of course, I realized eventually someone from the safety police would be watching this video, so you'll magically see the respirator pop on my face. Don't get me wrong, I don't want all this very fine dust in my lungs, that's not good, but I just got in a hurry, forgot to use it. Blowing everything out here and going to clean off the lathe a little bit and go on to the next process, which is really fun. This is going to be the part where I drill out the holes for the bushings and drill out the long hole that is going to accommodate that 1/4 inch aluminum rod. It's at this point where you'll see the holes that I tapped earlier become really critical, as you need the lathe to turn as true as possible when you're going to try to drill this hole that is approximately 13 inches long. That's the nylon bushings that I'm using. Those are a 1/2 inch outer diameter, so I have a 1/2 inch bit that I'm going to be using, and I only need to drill this first hole initially as deep as the actual bushing. Here's the bit that I'm going to be using to drill out the aluminum rod. It's actually a 3/8 bit, so the 1/4 inch rod will have a 1/16 of an inch on either side as free play going all the way through the rolling pin. And probably the most important thing to do when going through this procedure is to keep your bore line clean So you're going to see me initially being careful when I start the hole, and then as I start getting in there, just keep it blown out. Take small incremental steps. Don't try to take it all in one pass, or you will surely start a fire, or the wood will cause friction and catch, and you'll either throw the piece of wood or hurt yourself. Thankfully, I've never done that before on the lathe. Like I said before, I think the lathe is actually probably the most dangerous machine in the entire shop. Just because with the lathe, you're actually using the tool to spin the piece of wood instead of taking the wood to the tool which is spinning. And so there's always an extra level of precaution you have to have in that process. There you go, we have a rolling pin. And there's the hole that's bored clean through. Next thing I have to do is just clean up the ends real quick. It's just a real shallow cut, doesn't hardly remove any material at all, but cleans it up, makes it look nicer on the end, so when the customer sees it, they see that extra level of perfection in the process. And then there's just a quick sand up that I have to do to get some of those marks out. And this is actually where I'm going to start doing the final sand on the process. Having a little bit of foresight helps in a project. If you see any potential where you're going to have marks from your process, it's good to get that out right away. Well, now it's time to start on the handles, and it's a very, very similar process as before. Here I'm drilling a 1/4 inch hole to accommodate that aluminum rod. And if you're wondering what species of wood this is right here, this is Brazilian cherry. It's a very, very dense wood. It is a little bit oily, but boy, it is one of the most beautiful woods to work with. And it's very, very durable, so it's going to make a great species for this rolling pin project. I've made many different styles of rolling pins over the years. I've made them with big fixed handles. I've done laminated with different species of wood incorporated into the rolling pin itself. And believe it or not, what people seem to like best, including my lovely wife, is just a simple tapered handle. It seems to be the most comfortable. I do mine approximately 1 inch on the high end, and then I take it down using the rule of thirds and halves to a 1/2 inch at the end, and that taper seems to be very, very comfortable. The overall handle length on this rolling pin is 3.5 inches, which seems to be a good size to accommodate both larger male and smaller female hands. It seems to be the sweet spot. As you may notice, if I didn't point it out, you may not notice it. I do spend quite a bit more time doing the measuring and marking with the handles. Anything that gets in a person's hand that they're going to be holding regularly, eventually they're going to notice the variances, and if they see one side is bigger than the other, or one side's a little longer than the other, or one side isn't sanded as well as the other, these sorts of things show your name, and they show the marksmanship and the craftsmanship of which you choose to aim in your project. So I do spend a pretty good amount of time just making sure that everything is right, everything looks the same, everything feels the same. And I believe that shows a real professional quality in what you're doing. So just keep that in mind. If you're doing this or you're watching this video with the intent of making it a project of your own, obviously feel free to do that. That's why I make these videos. But just keep in mind your workmanship. The better your workmanship, the more confident you are in your product, and the better the price can be, or the better the asking price can be for it as you go to sell it. You'll have all sorts of justifiers for your price for your product. And believe me, discerning customers can tell a big difference between something cheap that they'll buy at your local big box store and something really professionally done, where you see it, where there's no sanding marks in it, no tooling marks, and everything is made to extreme precision. Alright, well, I'm wrapping up the handle here. We're about to go to the next step in the process. But before I get to that, there's just going to be the final sanding on this handle. Now obviously I had to make 2 of these, but for video editing purposes I didn't want to bore you to death with that, so you'll just see the one that I'm making right here. Now here coming up is one of my favorite parts of a project on the lathe, and that's the parting off. Basically you're taking this little tenon down in the end down to a little bit of nothing. You're getting as small as you possibly can until that part decides that structurally it can't handle the cut anymore. And sometimes you can get this wood, depending on the density and the grain structure, down to literally a piece of string before it breaks off. And there it goes. I've accomplished my task. Well, here's the next part, is how we're going to secure these nylon bushings into the rolling pin. Little trick that I've used before. If you ever stay at a hotel or you get credit card offers in the mail, go ahead and take that card, clip off the end, and you have your stir stick, and then you can use the card for your epoxy. I just roughed up the nylon bushings there a little bit to make sure that this epoxy has something to grab to. Obviously, nylon, being the plastic that it is, does not accept any sort of glue well, and so roughing that up helps out quite a bit. Go ahead and hammer those into the ends as flush as possible, and I'll be sanding the ends later. Similar process with the aluminum rod. Just sand that up, make sure that the epoxy has something to grab to, and then it's pretty self-explanatory. You just put that on there, and I sanded it within a tight tolerance, so I'm just hammering it in, and it's going to be a nice tight fit, something that will never come off. Well, once we're done with that, I sand the ends of the rolling pin to a high grit so that those are nice and polished looking, and then we can go ahead assembling the rest of the rolling pin. Just like before, using the epoxy, making sure that everything fits beforehand and that there's something to grab to, and give it a couple taps to hammer it in. And there you go. I just use boiled linseed oil on my project. Don't get into the scams of the butcher block oil, which is just purified mineral oil. I find that the linseed oil really brings out the beauty of the wood, and if the customer ever has to reapply in the future, you can tell them that that's all it is, and it will be simple and easy for them to fix in the future. Well, would you look at that? That doesn't look half bad now, does it?
Well, that is about it. I'm going to wipe off the last bit of oil. Going to be a very nice gift for someone someday. If you like what you're seeing, please go ahead and subscribe. I have videos showing up every now and then of me doing everything from sawmilling to my woodworking here in the shop. Appreciate you watching. Have a great day.